3 years ago, when I went for the very first ever visit to Western Australia, I met some people on the plane, and they were talking about secession by Western Australia from the rest of Australia. And I smiled. I thought it was a gag. And they smiled. And 2 weeks later, I've been there, 2 weeks ago, and they're not smiling. They mean it. And the man who knows more about the secessionist movement of Western Australia than anybody else is my guest tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Lang Hancock. Mr. Hancock, secession from federal government, it's basically a very serious step. Do you really mean to secede?
I think there's no other alternative. We wish to secede economically from Canberra, not so much from Australia. There's no choice in the matter, I don't think, ultimately, because of the inroads that the Canberra government has made to Australian life generally. It's weakened us economically, particularly Western Australia, and it's weakened us internationally. We're practically defenceless, and there's no other step, I don't think, that we can take.
But if you do secede, is Western Australia capable of taking care of itself?
Well, Australia isn't capable of taking care of itself anyhow, so that doesn't make any difference whatsoever. We're a European populated country of only 13 million. We're in an Asian area, you might say, and any one of our neighbours could take us, as I've said before. Singapore could take us by telephone, and there's just nothing we could jolly well do. So the only thing we can do is develop Western Australia, the richest part of it, to the point of view where we've got a resources policy which will make other people dependent on us, people who can defend us. And then they'll have to, and if they become sufficiently dependent upon us, they will then have to defend that part of Australia, Western Australia. Then, of course, that will bring Australia into the defence basket.
But why do you want to secede?
Well, because we've simply got to develop Western Australia, and the odds are all against us. At the moment, we're a totally different economy to the rest of Australia. We provide a captive market, a high-priced captive market for $1,000 million worth of eastern states' goods. In return, they buy about 75 million from us. Now, that imposes a cost structure of about 35% on Western Australia, which is a primary producing state. If we had that $1,000 million to bargain with the rest of the world, to supply us with goods at a much cheaper rate, our cost of production would be lower, and we'd be able to write long-term take-or-pay contracts for all of our raw material, not only iron ore, bauxite, uranium. We would do it with our wheat and our wool, and we'd have a flowing economy. In no time we'd have more population than, say, New Zealand, which itself seceded from New South Wales years ago. That part of the continent, which is the most vulnerable, would be developed, and the sort of associations that we would make overseas, I think, would stop it becoming a Russian lake.
What sort of support, tax-wise, does Western Australia give to the rest of Australia?
Well, it produces something like 22.5% of the total export wealth of Australia from 7.5% of the people. So it's pretty incongruous, the whole setup, to remaining within the Commonwealth.
So you feel that if this tax money that you pay to the federal government were returned back into Western Australia, it would be rewarding for Western Australians?
I don't mean so much that, no. I don't mean that if you brought back so much tax money to Western Australia and the West Australian bureaucracy set up another Canberra and did the same thing there and wasted the taxpayers' money just the same way. No, I don't mean that at all. Well, what I mean is what we must be free to develop, the enormous riches which are in Western Australia for the sake of Western Australia and Australia as a whole. And we're not doing that, we've got no hope of doing it.
But if Western Australia seceded, what sort of an effect would it have on Australia itself?
It would make Australia stronger defence-wise and economically, I would think.
How?
By developing all these enormous riches that are up there as quickly as possible. At the moment, there's nothing being developed up there. It's stationary, it's stagnant. The whole of the Australian economy is stagnant.
But do you honestly think that if Western Australia decided to secede, that the federal government is going to stand by and say, yes, go away?
Well, they've never heard of Western Australia unless there's a rape or a murder, so it wouldn't worry them too much, I don't think, in the least. But if they did, what could they do? They haven't got an army, they haven't got a navy, they've got nothing of any consequence. I mean, Taiwan, they're going to arrest a few Taiwanese shipping boats. Taiwan has got 20 times the number of men under arms that Australia's got. It's ludicrous. So there's nothing that they could do.
Well, wouldn't the federal force...
It would take them 3 months to shift. Any soldiers of any magnitude across the Trans line.
But if they did do that, what would happen?
We haven't got them. We haven't got them to do it. There's no tank west of Victoria Barracks in Melbourne.
Just a question. I mean, what sort of sympathy would you get from... because I know that every state in Australia is tremendously proud of its own state. Now, if you seceded, what sort of sympathy would you get from other states?
Well, possibly you'd get a lot of sympathy from Queensland. You might get some from Tasmania. You certainly wouldn't get any from what we call the Boomerang Coast, Sydney or Melbourne, this part of it.
You're not terribly keen on the eastern states, are you?
No, we're a different economy. We're a different country, really, because we're farmers, pastoralists and miners. We're not manufacturers in any shape or form.
Do you feel that Western Australia is supporting the eastern states?
Oh, terribly, yes.
How?
Overwhelming so. So I was saying we're reducing 22.5% of the wealth from 7.5% of the people.
So that you're implying basically that the eastern Australians are bumming off you?
Yes, if you can put it that way and get that language fast.
If by chance you did secede and it led basically to a civil war in which Australians were killing Australians, would you not have any sort of guilt?
It couldn't possibly lead to that in any shape or form. As I said, there's nothing to fight with. Nobody could fight, nobody would want to fight. That is ludicrous, I think. The only army that would invade Western Australia would be an army of migrants coming over from the eastern states to join in the riches.
If suddenly, I mean, you seceded, I mean, and I stay with this secession, if you seceded and you have no protection from what was your country, Australia, what is to stop one of the major powers, what is to stop what they call the Yellow Hordes pouring down and taking over what is, as you said, the most wealthy part of Australia?
Well, our position at the moment, the whole of Australia, is dependent entirely upon Japan, far more so than we ever were on Britain. If Japan sneezes, we get pneumonia. Right, well now, we don't want to be dependent upon the Japanese wholly and solely. But if we are able, with the development of Western Australia, bring in, say, the Persians, who've got the largest air force bordering on the Indian Ocean, and the Western Germany, say, and United States, all vying and all dependent upon the output of our raw materials, each one of those would make certain that one didn't come in and grab the lot. But worse than that, I mean, if some of these big powers are beholden to you, they'll make certain that none of our immediate neighbours, all of whom are stronger than us, won't come in and take us over. When people realise that they can just walk in there and take the place for nothing, any would-be dictator would have no trouble in doing that. So we're in a very vulnerable position.
May I ask you a personal question? I know that you're an extremely wealthy man. May I ask how much of your involvement with this movement is in protection of your own self-interest, or is it a patriotism to Western Australia?
Well, I wouldn't claim to be a patriot, but I've got money, and I suppose it's selfish to want to protect your own country for yourself and your family. And this is the only way I can see of protecting it.
By secession?
Yes, to make it strong.
Well, I find that a contradiction. I mean, if you secede, you break apart. If you remain together, you may be strong.
No, you break apart, you get your independence economically, but you don't break any ties of language or inheritance or anybody be free to move around the continent, intermarry and so on and so forth. You don't break You don't break any of those.
You mean you'd let a Western Australian marry an Eastern Australian?
Of course we would. Look, it's very analogous, I think, to New Zealand. They're separated from us by a sea of water. We're separated by a sea of sand, an enormous desert. Well, now, you must remember that the first Davis Cup, New Zealand seceded from New South Wales. We didn't go and fight them. We won the first 3 or 4 Davis Cups with Australia and New Zealand, right? Anzac, Australia and New Zealand. We're not fighting one another. Yet they're closer to Sydney. Sydney's the second, from the point of view of population, Sydney is the second largest New Zealand city.
May I ask you one question before we finish? As an Australian, and obviously a person who loves Australia, where do you think Australia is heading?
Down the drain. Very fast.
Why?
Well, you've only got to see what's happening to us. We haven't got any friends overseas, and our economy inflation is running away to the point where it's obviously dangerous. We've got one of the highest tax rates in the world, and our output is diminishing. Now, with all the wealth that we have got in this country, it's scandalous that we should be in that position.
Well, I don't know whether I wish you luck in your secession, but I wish you luck in beating inflation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.